Hey YouTube, a remake doesn't always have to be a bad thing. While movie remakes are often viewed as a bad thing, often inferior to the original, like with the recent Lilo and Stitch remake, or how a lot of video game remakes might not really do what people want, might not add any new things, like the Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl remix of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. They don't always have to be a bad thing. In fact, many times they're often a side grade or sometimes an upgrade. They can also be really nice for re-releasing products that are either really hard to get or that you may have just missed years back. For example, I have been a Transformers fan and collector since like 4th grade. I am 31 now. But back in 2004, when I was in 4th grade, I had no money. I couldn't really afford to buy a lot of figures, and a lot of my money went into Pokemon cards and Bionicles. So now that I have adult money, being able to buy the things I wanted back in the day is kind of cool, but they can also still be expensive. For example, I have an incomplete version of a Galaxy Force Cybertron Optimus. The electronics are shot. I've tried putting in new batteries, but yeah, the electronics are shot. I'm missing the key, I'm missing the blaster, I'm missing the foot piece. Yeah, it's an incomplete Optimus. It does technically go together, but it is largely incomplete and doesn't fully work. I got this for $50, but during this summer, I went to a store that had a complete Optimus Prime that was selling it for $300. Meanwhile, only just recently, in the far gone year of 2019, we got Galaxy Upgrade Prime. This is not a perfect figure, it doesn't have electronics, and it is a fairly heavy retool / remold of Ultra Magnus. But it also looks nearly identical to the toy I wanted from 2006. I just had to wait 13 years. Other times, figures can be just a straight upgrade. For example, the original Headmaster toy for Brainstorm came out in 1987, but only a few years later, relatively, in 2016, we got the Titans Return figure. This isn't perfect either, but it is a very faithful recreation that sees this character with modern day posing, modern day joints. It's far sturdier, and it also looks a lot more streamlined and looks a lot more like a spaceship as opposed to a brick with wings. Like I said, sometimes it also just helps that you can get figures released when you weren't able to get them before. Since I started in Armada, again, I didn't have a lot of money. So figures like Armada Starscream, I wasn't able to buy, but when they released a new figure of that same character, I was able to pick it up. Same thing with other Cybertron figures, such as Vector Prime. Ironically, also Starscream. Override, and a figure I wanted more than anything, Metroplex. So really the question comes down to, is a remake good or bad? Well, it kind of depends. For some figures, like the recent animated Bumblebee, which came out in 2024, it is a better version of the version that came out in 2008. The original Bumblebee was very gangly, very thin. Meanwhile, this one scales perfectly with his matching animated Optimus Prime. He's not a perfect figure either, but he is really good. And these work well together as a pair compared to the original ones that scaled improperly. So, what are we here for? Today, I'm going to look at one of my favorite Transformers figures of all time. I've had this figure since 2005. This is Transformers Cybertron Sideways, though his Japanese name is NoiseMaze, if you're more familiar with that name. And as you might be aware, Age of the Primes saw him get a 2025 release. So, let's see. Was the 20 years difference worth it? Is this an upgrade? Or did I just basically buy the same figure twice? Let's find out. For those of you who have never experienced the original 2005 Sideways or NoiseMaze figure, he's pretty cool. As you kind of saw earlier, he turns into kind of a stealth bomber type jet. He also has a cyber planet key to activate his feature, which I'll show off in a second. But this style of key and this symbol on his chest, let's see if it'll focus. Focus. But the symbol on his chest, you can kind of see it looks kind of like a golden sunburst. Those only appear on Sideways, NoiseMaze, and Soundwave, which I think in a previous video I made years ago, like back in college, proposed that either this symbol was the you can see it now. This symbol was the symbol of Planet X, which was kind of the rival planet to Gigantian, and that of this, of course, because it was so different than the Cybertronian Decepticon key, was the Planet X key. Its powers, though, we never really knew. In Soundwave, it opens up his bomb pod thing to deploy Laserbeak, and in Sideways, it turns his shield into a bladed weapon. It also lets him swap factions. For those of you who aren't familiar with the character, there were two versions of Sideways. There was the one in Armada, and then he returned in Transformers Cybertron. In Armada, the character we knew as Sideways was actually a character called like Double Face, and his whole thing was that he had two minicons that he used to swap between Autobot and Decepticon personas, sure. Who he was in reference to like Punch Counter Punch, except rather than being actually an Autobot who disguised himself as a Decepticon, he was instead a Decepticon who disguised himself as an Autobot. But turns out he was actually an agent of Unicron. This version, which is technically a separate character who references the original, has a similar feature. He can switch between Autobot, as you can see on his little badge here, and Decepticon. If I push down on the key, it lets you swap between Autobot and Decepticon at will. I'm really sorry that this is blurry. Let me get my face out of the way. But you can see Autobot, Decepticon, and when you push in, then you can have them either be Autobot or Decepticon. But once you go far enough to lock it, it deploys the wings. I don't think mine currently, there we go, it does lock in. Yeah, you can have him be Autobot or Decepticon, and you can even deploy these little surprise blades. To my knowledge, the remake, the one from 2025, doesn't have that same pop-out feature, but as you can see, it is still designed to have a key that can plug in with blades that pop out. So let's get him open and see just how he compares to his, 2-decade-old counterpart. You might be able to tell some of the differences already with the new Sideways, but this is not bad. He's a lot lankier than his original version. You might also notice his shoulders and upper torso are a little bit thinner compared to the height of his torso. This one also is really interesting because unlike before where the wing cape was two separate pieces, these are separate. So you can technically pose the cape. But yeah, he has a slightly longer torso and more importantly, has waist rotation. So yeah, you can get more dynamic poses with this version, which is really kind of cool. I did notice that he doesn't have light piping in either his face, because he has kind of the Soundwave visor thing going on. He doesn't have light piping, doesn't have the clear plastic here or here, And so that was probably just to cut down on budget. It is a lot easier to paint things orange or just have orange plastic than to make clear plastic inserts. And Transformers seems to be shying away from clear plastic in the last few years, which on a related note, we don't have clear plastic on the key. The new key is actually black plastic that is painted orange and silver. And you'll notice it's a lot smaller. Another thing you probably noticed just from me holding things up, the shield piece, while about the same size as the original, detaches. It's no longer like bolted to his arm. Now it's a piece that can come off and has a 5mm peg. So you could attach it to either arm or potentially onto his back if you so wanted to. Never mind, he doesn't have a plug on his back, but you could, in theory, plug it onto either arm, have it in one of his hands, or because he has plugs on the sides of his legs, you could do that. Similarly, the new blade pieces, because they still have the 5mm ports, can just simply plug in to the side of the leg, as opposed to the original blades, which had these little armatures that they connected to, which was always kind of weird to me. But they did add, I guess, little tiny roller wheels. Also, the blades have changed a little bit too. These are the original Sidewaves blades compared to the newer ones, which are significantly smaller. They are noticeably smaller, and they don't have those little bits of green paint. This may just be to cut down on budget since this already is a deluxe class in 2025. But, for example, other little cost-cutting measures, for example, the heels are black instead of orange, or on the wing bits, you don't have the green spots. You can see they still have the molding for the spots, but they aren't colored green. So just some interesting kind of cost-cutting measures, though I don't think it's really to the detriment of the figure. Oh, same thing with the back of the hands, the wrist bits. They don't have the bronze paint that the original did. But the accessory is still kind of cool. The wing bits, the little blades, don't pop out. They actually built in a mechanism for the key. Here we go. Is it a mechanism? Well, I thought they did. It maybe just plugs in. And I think I see a little lever on the back here. And does that flip it? Oh, this little lever is how you get the different badges between Autobot and Decepticon. That's actually kind of cool how they do that. I really like that. I can just have him always be a Decepticon. As for the blades, do these not pop out? Oh, they're just manual. Okay, they're just manual blades. That's fine. And unlike the original figure where you had to have all 4 blades out, you could, in theory, do like a pickaxe. You could, in theory, do like bow mode. You could like hybridize it if you wanted to. Or if you just want, you could have, one like upward blade or like downward blades. You can customize it, as opposed to the original where it was just simply all are in, all are out. But if you wanted to, if you wanted to fold in the inner wing, the inner blades, it doesn't fully deploy them. You can see if you want to have the smaller blades out, the bigger blades have to fold in because they're all connected. So manual blades, a switch to change, and this, while it doesn't have a function, does still connect. For those of you curious how the key, by the way, if it has backwards compatibility with some of the other Cybertron remakes, some of them, such as the Optimus Galaxy Upgrade figure, just don't have the key plug-in part where it would normally go, which is a little bit sad. Though I guess technically you could pop in the key in this little slot. It just doesn't actually plug in. It just kind of sits there. But for figures like Cybertron Starscream, he, again, has his own little key. It's the Cybertronian version of the Decepticon key. And so you could, in theory, plug Sideways' 2025 key into the slot. Or, in the case of the Velocitron Speedia Override, she has her key slot in the back, and the key kind of awkwardly fits. It doesn't really lock in place because it's designed to fit instead kind of the original key better. Clearly, this was made before they planned to make, the newer figures. There you go. Transformation was pretty straightforward. That being said, I have had this figure for 2 decades, but even still, Transformers instructions have gotten so good over the years. They used to be terrible. Now they're actually pretty decent. But even still, other than like 1 or 2 little steps where folding the arms and the legs was different from this figure, I basically knew how to do this. This is a great recreation of the Sideways figure. I still love this. And you can tell that they have their differences. Namely, for example, the shield can fold up and store away on the old one. And if you try to unfold the figure into like turret mode, the blades pop out if you have the key. Meanwhile, for this one, popping in the key doesn't do anything, like we've already talked about, but it doesn't have the armature, it doesn't pop up. Which means if you want to have the blades out, you have to manually fold them out. But if you want it in turret mode, there's no place to plug it. Like, if you want to plug into the top of the ship, you have to have the wings folded in, which is a little bit of a bummer. Something you could do is if you flip out the peg, you can peg it to the underside of one of the legs here or here. But I'll be honest, this doesn't have nearly the look that this does. So I would say this whole thing is a downgrade in that sense, but this is still not bad. I still love this. This is cool. Not only that, but the fact that you can easily switch between Autobot and Decepticon with just a switch rather than having to have the key. Because if you lose this key, he's stuck in Autobot mode. He's only a Decepticon as long as you have the key in, unless you like glue it in place for some reason. But you can easily switch at will, and I really like that. I also just like how this holds together better. Well, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the turret bit right now, but for example, these wings just plug in. They don't require the attachment point here and the little weird wheel armature, because the wheels on the bottom were never important to begin with. You weren't gonna doot-de-doo the stealth bomber. You were gonna whoosh it. No one doot-de-doos, you whoosh. And that being said, it whooshes very well. It's a good ship. It feels good in the hand. An interesting thing is because of the slight differences in the molding, on this one you can see Sideways' horns stick out a little bit as opposed to the original, where like it kind of just like they do tiny poke out a little bit, but these look like fangs as opposed to this one, which just kind of looks like almost like bronze highlights or bronze headlights. So yeah, interesting. I also do kind of like the silhouette more. This kind of looks more like a Decepticon badge with little wings attached, as opposed to this one, which is very clearly just kind of a triangle with spikes and wings. Very similar. but ultimately different in ways that don't matter too much. I've already mentioned before minor little details like the fact that, little bronze paint here, a little bit of green paint there, things like that are different, or like this doesn't have the clear plastic. But honestly, if you never got this figure, this is great. I like this. This will not replace this, because to me, this is still one of my favorite figures, and I've had this for over 20 years. This is one of my favorite figures ever. I would never replace this, but this is really fun. If you can find this at your local Walmart, get this. This is worth picking up. I think it's a good example of a Transformers remake that went well. And that's not just nostalgia talking, because I still love this one more, but this one's cool and definitely worth a pickup. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I've been Sylvia Moonbeam. You've all been awesome. Leave a comment if you want to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye.